A third round of voting takes place this Saturday, June 20th through Tuesday, June 23rd for President of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. If you're a registered voter for the 2026 LCMS presidential election, I strongly encourage you to vote to re-elect Issues Etc. regular guest, Pastor Matt Harrison, for a final 3-year term. If you're not a voter, please encourage your pastor and your congregation's lay voter to vote for President Harrison. Remember to vote June 20th through the 23rd.
What I didn't understand actually was why they chose that particular Bible verse from Genesis, because the verse reads in part, whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth. That to me means we are all God's creatures and God's children.
Yes, especially when you see the rainbow.
So I don't know.
That was what triggered them is the rainbow.
But I just, isn't that like supporting the idea that we are all God's children?
Yeah.
So was that supposed to be a protest?
That's Sunny Hobson of The View. Little, I don't know, female exegesis of a Genesis passage that appeared on two of the hats. A similar passage was written by a third pitcher, the San Francisco Giants, on their Pride night. They were wearing the Pride hats, but they appended them, some say defiled them, by writing a Bible passage on the hat where it could be seen. Greetings and welcome to Issues Etc. I'm Todd Wilkin. Terry Mattingly is going to join us to talk about media coverage of Major League Baseball and Pride hats. Then a little bit later, Mark Stern joins us to give us an update on the 69th regular convention of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Terry Mattingly is Senior Fellow on Communications and Culture at St. Constantine College in Houston, Texas. He writes Rational Sheep, a Substack newsletter on faith, family, and mass media, and he's author of the National On Religion column for the Andrews McMeel Universal Syndicate. For 2 decades, he led the GetReligion.org website. Terry, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
It's an old question, but still relevant. Is it anti-Christian for the San Francisco Giants to enforce their company's uniform policy, and Major League Baseball has uniform policies linked to Pride Night?
Well, it certainly is something that would offend some Christians, but would not offend others. I mean, Pride Night itself offends many Christians, but does not offend others. I think it would be interesting to know if there are any prayers or invocations during Pride Month at the stadium in San Francisco and what clergy would do them, who sings the national anthem. I know this is something you and I have stressed a lot, and a lot of listeners this kind of grates at them. There is a liberal Christianity and there is a conservative Christianity on issues of sexual morality, the definition of the family, marriage, etc. There is an ancient Christianity, and then there is a modern or even postmodern Christianity. So to try to get around this question of, is this an attack on Christianity, a reporter would have to quote people who are making value judgments about that. Now, to me, it would be very easy in this case to have a quote from someone, a religious figure, who supports the right of the player to do this, and at the same time have a quote from a liberal in one of America's most powerful culturally liberal cities, have another clergy person back the team and back Pride Night. In other words, you'd have to show that it is a complex situation if you look at it in terms of religious content. Now, what the story is actually about is, does Major League Baseball have an ironclad right to defend what its players do when they're at work? In other words, to what degree, and this is something that there's all kinds of case law on this, and you throw in a church-state angle and it gets even more complex. But suffice it to say, and this made it into the coverage, and much of the coverage isn't all that bad. The Associated Press story, frankly, is quite good. The New York Times piece is quite good. But it's wonderful that piece from The View nails the most interesting question that no one really addresses in any of the stories. Was it offensive to put, instead of, let's say, a Bible verse about homosexuality, a Bible verse about the meaning of marriage, a Bible verse about sex outside of marriage, all those sorts of things you could see people rising up in anger about. What is controversial about the Bible verse written on the two hats, other than the fact that they dared to violate the ironclad laws of Major League Baseball, that you can't put anything on your jersey unless we tell you that you can. There are all kinds of theme nights. There are all kinds of special patches. I think on Mother's Day and in some other cases, players are encouraged to personalize things, or the breast cancer day, for example. But the key is Major League Baseball is your employer, and we get to tell you what to do. That's the issue in this case. My personal conviction about the Bible verse, I think at some point someone needed to dare quote it, because it's a complex verse. The whole thing. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, "Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, every beast of the earth, with you as many as came out of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut by the waters of a flood, and never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." God said, "This is the sign of the covenant, which I make between you and every living creature that is with you for all generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of covenant between me and the earth." I could go on reading it, but the point here, what is controversial about this verse? In effect, these baseball players, and I suspect their own clergy, or whoever is working with them behind the scenes, what they are saying is, the rainbow belongs to us. The rainbow is a sign of biblical covenant. Deal with it. Where, as opposed to the Rainbow Coalition, which was a political movement that wanted the rainbow as a sign of hope, and then in the symbolism of pride, the rainbow colors of all different diversities, etc. But it's also a sign of claiming for a particular movement, the Pride Month movement, claiming a biblical symbol as its own. And these players are clearly saying, at least I think they're clearly saying, no, the rainbow symbol of hope and God's covenant with humanity belongs to the Bible and belongs to people who believe in the Bible. And that's what I think made this so offensive.
So in that issue of context, it's told in the story of the flood narrative where the earth has just passed through all living things, with this, save Noah and his family and the animals saved on the ark, have passed through the penultimate judgment of God on the world. And did you see anything in the media coverage that said, look, Christians believe that was the penultimate judgment of God, and that rainbow says, not until the second judgment will I destroy every living thing?
Oh, nobody's going to get involved, in that kind of an issue. The fact that one or two of the stories even mentioned the content of the Bible verse is significant. But here's what the Associated Press said. The portion of the Genesis verse cited by Roop on his hat included God's promise to never again send a worldwide flood, and the rainbow in the sky is the sign of that covenant. Okay, let's get really snarky here in terms of interpreting years of religious news history. Can you think of any situation where Christians, Pat Robertson leaps to mind, actually said God was sending floods, hurricanes, storms, etc., in judgment on a city or a state? I can think of some, and they almost always had to do with what? Gay marriage, homosexuality, pride, whatever. So once again, if a newspaper staff wants to go into the weeds on this, there is all kind of interesting things about what the players chose to do and what they didn't choose to do. they made a very subtle reclaiming of a biblical symbol, as opposed to waving a red flag of verses that would openly be considered, well, verses that if you read them on a street corner right now in Britain, you might go to jail, especially if you read them in a gay prominent neighborhood. There's verses you could read that were offenses. Is this verse offensive? In its statements, Major League Baseball came back and said, we're not dealing with the content here. We're not dealing with the language. We're saying you cannot alter your uniform. And they quoted the actual regulation. A player may not write, attach, affix, embroider, or otherwise display nicknames or messages on apparel or playing equipment. Now, back off for a second. There were 3 players that took part in some way of kind of standing up against the pride situation. To me, it's really interesting to ask what would have happened if the 3 pitchers had done what some players have done in the past, which is refuse to wear the pride uniform or the pride hat or whatever a team has come up with, and instead says, no, we're going to wear our normal business apparel for this game. We want to wear the regular uniform with no other extra messages. To me, it would have been interesting to see if Major League Baseball would have thrown the book at the players if that's what they had chosen to do, as opposed to alter the pride hat in clear violation of the regulation of the powers that be in Major League Baseball.
Terry Mattingly is our guest. We're talking about media coverage of Major League Baseball and pride hats. On the other side, do we know what message Major League Baseball was sending the players in question? Was it simply violation of regulation, or was it a tacit support of Pride Night?
Here's an easy way for you to help us contend for truth in an age of anti-truth. Subscribe to the Issues Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Just type Issues Etc. in the YouTube search engine and click subscribe. For Apple and Spotify, type Issues Etc. in the search engine, hit follow, and leave us a 5-star review. Help us inform other podcast listeners by subscribing to the Issues Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple.
Solid, serious, substantive. You're listening to Issues Etc.
Teaching the great books helps grow students' love for what is good, true, and beautiful. That's why Memoria Press publishes literature guides for students in 1st through 12th grades. These user-friendly guides teach students to contemplate classic novels so that they may grow in wisdom. Learn more at memoriapress.com. Save $5 when you enter the coupon code LPR26MP. Memoria Press, saving Western civilization one student at a time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Our church loves and is grateful for those that serve our country. Operation Barnabas, part of Ministry to the Armed Forces, equips you to reach out to veterans in your community to bring Christ to those that served. Call Ministry to the Armed Forces at 314-996-1337 or email lcmschaps@lcms.org.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
God bless our military.
Welcome back to Issues Etc. I'm Todd Wilken. We're discussing media coverage of Major League Baseball and pride hats. Terry Mattingly is our guest, author of the National On Religion column for the Andrews McMeel Universal Syndicate. So, Terry, this is what I'm curious about, and I didn't really find it in any of the coverage. And, of course, if you just peruse X or any of the other social media platforms, it will be either people defending this or it will be many people saying, look, this is just... in addition to the fact that they have Pride Nights, this is just more evidence that Major League Baseball's gone woke. Has anyone asked, is this just standard operating procedure for when a player somehow alters his uniform in a way outside their regs? Or was there anything in the rebuke of these players that said Pride Night is an inviolate event and you guys weren't playing nice or something along those lines?
Well, I mean, you're raising some excellent questions there. I think the thing we have to look at is to say, what else is in the same ballpark as Pride Night? Why has Pride Night received almost universal, let's come back to the word almost, universal recognition in this sport, highly urban sport, major cities, et cetera, et cetera. So what other, I went online and did some AI searching and whatever else to try to find out who else gets so much recognition from the sport that it alters the uniform. So listen to these other causes that pride is being equated with. Armed Forces Day, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Jackie Robinson Day, racism and the greatest hero probably in the history of the sport. Lou Gehrig Day, now that's linked to a specific ALS, a specific disease. Roberto Clemente Day, which many people see is not just a salute to a really, truly great player, but also a salute to the role of Hispanics and Latinos, Caribbean, etc., in the history of baseball. So basically, the question here is to what degree is the LGBTQ plus movement being equated with moms, dads, veterans, and the great heroes of the game. Now, we have a very significant situation going on right now where the Texas Rangers, down in the buckle of the Bible Belt in the state of Texas, the Texas Rangers has decided not to do Pride Month, not to do Pride Night, and instead the Texas Rangers are doing a salute to faith and family. Well, I've read a couple of stories about that. Someone needs to ask, is that going to alter the uniform? I would bet the moon and the stars that it does not alter the uniform. I don't think anybody's going to make a Jewish player wear a baseball cap with some sort of collection of religious symbols or something other than his own. And in fact, if you tried to do that, you'd probably offend devout Christian players just as much as you would Jewish or Muslim. By the way, currently at this point in time, there are no Muslims playing in Major League Baseball. And it's almost never happened in the past. So when people say, I'll bet the Major League guys wouldn't have gone after a verse from the Quran, on a hat at Pride Night, well, that's really something that nobody's tested because it really hasn't had a chance to come up. So the question here, as I see it, is employment, employers' control of their workplace. And that's one set of law. Then you have free speech law. When can employees offend their employers and not get fired or not get disciplined? Or when can employers make employees violate their own religious beliefs? COVID tests, we've had all kinds of things about inoculations. We've had all sorts of things, vaccines. That's a big, heavy piece of church-state law. But to me, what's really interesting here is what happens now if some other teams in the league say, okay, the league doesn't control our jerseys. We control our jerseys. And we're not going to play the Pride Month game. We're going to stay out of this. And we're going to do Faith and Family Night, but we're not going to make it symbolic other than contemporary Christian music in the warm-ups, and maybe a few players will be asked to pray or give their testimony or something. What do you think we would have any press coverage if at Pride Night they had gay Christians give their testimonies about why this is a sign of God's covenant with them? Yeah, that would be interesting and complex. This is a very fascinating story, and I think we should watch and see if anything else happens in the rest of the month.
So it might be quite difficult for, say, the San Francisco Chronicle to find a conservative Christian in San Francisco in the Bay Area. But At the very least, do they not need to have a both sides conversation with a local seminary professor or a local pastor on both sides of this to say, this is what the rainbow means to me and this is what the rainbow means to me?
Yeah, that's it. That's important. And by the way, you have conservative Catholics in San Francisco, and you have very conservative Eastern Orthodox, and you have at least a piece of a Southern Baptist seminary still functioning there. So I don't think it would be as big of a challenge as some people would think. But what's really missing here is somebody needed to say, is the league's stance legal, either under employment workplace practice or under church-state law? I think they needed to talk to someone like the Alliance for the Defense of Freedom and then pick a lawyer on the left side as well and say, what is the status of the decision Major League Baseball has proclaimed here as gospel truth? Treat it like a church-state case. Treat it like an employment case, because that's really what it is.
So go into a little more detail. A lot of the press has talked about the Texas Rangers because they're one of the teams that is not even doing a Pride Night.
Right.
And we do not know the reasons for that. It's simply stated in the press that they're not doing a Pride Night. I'm curious as to what the position of that organization is.
Well, I think to some degree, this may sound like a real reach here. I don't think they want to get themselves into a Star Wars situation where they take their fan base and just rip it into two pieces with some sort of symbolic action. Now, lots of places, even in liberal cities like Baltimore and whatever, they do faith and family nights as well. And that just really grates at the left whenever it happens. But it doesn't seem to divide the ticket purchasing flock backing the team. The Pride Night thing, like I said before, you're equating the status of the LGBTQ plus community with Jackie Robinson, Roberto Clemente, Lou Gehrig, Mother's Day, for Pete's sake. I really think the best analogy here is, does Pride Day get to alter the uniform in the same way that Mother's Day and Memorial Day does?
Well, if I'm the commissioner of baseball, my solution to this is pretty simple. Stop changing the uniforms. Just wear your uniforms home and away, and we will avoid about 99.9% of all of this. You can still have your... Yes, does it mean that not everyone wears 42 on Jackie Robinson Day? Yeah, it does. Maybe a little 42 someplace, you can put 42 other places than on the players. And we completely avoid this kind of a situation. And I'd also, Terry, like to know the history of when they started fiddling with the uniforms for these marketing days.
Yeah. I think, the question you're asking in a subtle way is, what should the teams do? What should Major League Baseball do? I don't have any problem, and I don't think the people who buy tickets and do TV coverage would have any problem with jerseys that salute things in baseball. And I think a lot of MAGA America and a bunch of others would say, oh yeah, we want to be able to salute mom, and we want to be able to salute patriotism. But here's the one thing you could do. You could make a addition to that clause that simply says, if any player feels that a change in the uniform by their team's lords and who control the uniform, if anything is done that you feel violates your conscience, you have the right to wear your team's normal uniform in competition, and nobody will take legal issue with that. In other words, if someone, I don't know why they would, but if someone didn't want to honor Lou Gehrig or Roberto Clemente or whatever and wear the special uniform, it would be legal for them to wear, think of this as workplace apparel. They would have the right to wear their actual team uniform under any circumstance with no legal complications. To me, that's the easiest thing Major League Baseball could do. In other words, if you don't want to wear the pride hat, wear the appropriate home jersey hat for that night, which one of the San Francisco Giant pitchers did. wear the regular vestment for this ceremony, and you'll be fine. That's the quickest way out.
Terry Mattingly, a senior fellow on communications and culture at St. Constantine College in Houston, Texas. He writes Rational Sheep, a Substack newsletter on faith, family, and mass media. He's author of the National On Religion column for the Andrews McMeel Universal Syndicate, and for 2 decades, he led the GetReligion.org website. Terry, thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
Mark Stern joins us next. He previously served on the floor committees for theology and church relations and the university education system at the convention of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We'll talk about the 69th regular convention next. What did Martin Luther mean when he wrote that Christians live in Christ through faith and in the neighbor through love? And what's the difference between self-improvement and self-transcendence? Find out in the Issues Etc. Book of the Month for June, Lift Your Eyes, How to Live Outside Yourself. Learn more and purchase Lift Your Eyes at issuesetc.org or by calling Concordia Publishing House 1-800-325-3040. Lift Your Eyes, How to Live Outside Yourself, the Issues Etc. Book of the Month for June.
Listen to what you want, when you want. You're listening to Issues Etc.
Lutherans for Life applies God's Word, both His law and His gospel, to all the life issues: abortion, sexual purity, assisted suicide and euthanasia, and biotechnology. If you have any questions about LFL resources, or if you want to find out more about forming a life team or life chapter, or becoming a life advocate, contact Lutherans for Life at 888-364-LIFE or at info@lutheransforlife.org.
Hearing is taken for granted until you don't have it. It happens at all ages. Unfortunately, some are born deaf. Others lose it gradually. The end is the same: a world of silence. The Ephatha Lutheran Mission Society serves the deaf and hard of hearing domestically and internationally. They're the only recognized service organization in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod devoted solely to the deaf of all ages. Learn more at elms-deaf.org.